The village of Amangwe. In the heart of the African savanna, where the tall grasses met the mighty river, there was a small village named Amangwe. It was a place of peace and prosperity, where families lived in harmony with the land. The villagers grew crops like maize, millet, and yams, and raised cattle, goats, and chickens. Life was simple, yet full of joy, and the people shared what they had with one another. The elders would tell stories of the spirits of the land, the wind, the sun, and the rain, and how all life was connected in a delicate balance. But there was one man in Amangwe who was different from all the others. His name was Kazi, a man known for his wit and his courage. Though he was born into a poor family, Kazi had a sense of justice that surpassed that of anyone else in the village. His parents were hardworking, but like many in Amangwe, they struggled to make ends meet. Despite their best efforts, there were times when hunger gnawed at their stomachs. Kazi, however, always found hope even in the darkest times. As a child, Kazi often roamed the fields, looking for signs of the spirits that the elders spoke of. He would sit by the great baobab tree, its thick branches reaching out like the hands of ancient ancestors, and listen to the winds whispering through the leaves. It was here, under the shade of the tree, that Kazi first felt the calling of something greater, something that would guide him through the years to come. His village, though small, had always been self-sufficient. But in the years before the great drought came, things began to change. The rains became scarce, and the crops that once flourished withered in the dry soil. The river that had always been a lifeline to the people grew shallow, and fish became harder to find. People from other villages came to Amangwe, seeking refuge and food, and soon, the village was overwhelmed. Tensions rose, and the once peaceful community started to unravel. One evening, as Kazi sat by the river, a group of strangers arrived. They were weary from their journey, their clothes tattered, and their faces gaunt from hunger. Among them was an old man who, despite his frailty, walked with the authority of one who had seen much in his lifetime. The man approached Kazi and asked for help. "We are starving," the old man said, his voice weak but steady. "Our village has been consumed by drought. Please, we have no food left, no water. We seek only a little mercy." Kazi, moved by their plight, stood up. He had seen the hunger that was creeping into his own village, and he knew the old man's words were true. But there was little to offer. "There is not much to give," Kazi replied, "but I will speak with the elders and see if we can share what we have." The next day, Kazi went to the elders and spoke of the strangers. The village council convened, and after much discussion, they decided to provide them with a little food and water. The strangers thanked them and, in turn, promised to leave once they had recovered enough to continue their journey. Kazi, however, was not satisfied with merely offering a small portion of what little the village had. The hunger in the eyes of the strangers troubled him deeply, for it reminded him of his own family's struggles. And so, that night, Kazi made a decision that would change his life forever. The following day, Kazi packed a small sack with food, water, and supplies. He told no one of his intentions and left the village under the cover of darkness. His destination was the distant kingdom of Rico, a wealthy and prosperous land ruled by a greedy and heartless king. King Rico had an abundance of food and riches, yet he hoarded them for himself while his people suffered. Kazi had heard stories of the king's cruelty and oppression. It was said that he taxed his people heavily, forcing them to work the land while he lived in luxury, indifferent to their suffering. Kazi's plan was simple: to steal from the king, take his wealth, and bring it back to the people of Amangwe. He would return with enough food and gold to feed the hungry, to help his village survive. He did not take this decision lightly, for he knew that theft was a grave sin in the eyes of the gods. But in his heart, Kazi believed that the king's greed was far more sinful than any act of theft. For days, Kazi traveled across the savannah, through dense forest, and over high mountains. The land seemed to stretch on forever, and at times, Kazi felt as though he were walking toward an uncertain future. But he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the lives of his people depended on him. Eventually, Kazi reached the kingdom of Rico. The capital city was magnificent, with towering walls made of stone, and great temples and palaces that glittered in the sunlight. The king's palace was the grandest of them all, a towering structure adorned with gold and jewels, a symbol of his immense power. Kazi marveled at the opulence of the place, but he was not fooled. Beneath the glittering surface, he knew that the people outside the walls of the palace were starving. Kazi spent several days in the city, watching the guards, learning the layout of the palace, and observing the habits of the king's courtiers. He learned that the king was rarely seen in public, preferring to stay in the comfort of his palace. Kazi also discovered that the royal vault, where the king kept his treasures, was heavily guarded. But Kazi was clever. He used his wits and his knowledge of the land to slip past the guards and into the palace at night. In the darkness of the royal vault, Kazi found crates of food, barrels of grain, sacks of gold, and precious jewels. It was more than he had ever imagined. He took only what he believed would be enough to sustain his village: grain for the starving, gold for those in need, and treasures for the elders. He walked swiftly and quietly, leaving behind no trace of his presence except for a small token, a carved wooden figure, shaped like an antelope, the symbol of his village. As Kazi prepared to leave, he heard footsteps approaching. The guards were coming. With no time to waste, he made his escape, slipping out of the palace unnoticed. He was careful to avoid the streets, using his knowledge of the land to find a hidden path back toward the mountains. As he disappeared into the shadows, the sound of the king's alarm bells echoed behind him with his spoils, but he did not keep the treasures for himself. He gave the grain to the villagers, enough to last them through the coming months. He distributed the gold and jewels among the poor, ensuring that no one went without food or shelter. The villagers were overjoyed, for they had never seen such abundance. The elders, too, were amazed, for they knew that the gods had blessed them. However, there was no joy in Kazi's heart. While the people of Amangwe celebrated, Kazi wrestled with the consequences of his actions. He had stolen, and though he had stolen for the good of others, he wondered if he had done the right thing. Had he done justice, or had he simply become another thief, no different from the king he had sought to punish? As the days passed, the story of the righteous thief spread far and wide. Word reached the king of Riku, who was furious at the theft. He ordered his soldiers to search for the thief who had dared to steal from him. But Kazi, ever clever, had already disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind only his symbol, the carved antelope. The king, enraged and humiliated, vowed to capture the thief and make him pay for his crime. But Kazi's actions had already begun to spark a rebellion in the kingdom. The people, once afraid, began to rise against the king's oppression. They took the wealth that Kazi had stolen and used it to organize, to build new lives, to demand justice. The king's reign was weakening, and soon, the people of Riku were no longer afraid to speak out. They had learned that true power lay not in wealth, but in unity. Kazi had stolen from the rich, but he had given back to the poor, and in doing so, he had created a movement that could not be stopped. As the rebellion grew, the king found himself cornered. His once loyal soldiers began to abandon him, and his advisors turned against him. In a final act of desperation, he sent for Kazi, demanding that the thief come to him and face justice. But Kazi did not come. Instead, he sent a message to the king. True justice is not found in the walls of your palace or the treasures you hoard. It is found in the hearts of the people, who have risen up to take what is rightfully theirs. Your reign is over, King Riku. The king, broken and defeated, fled his palace. The people of Riku reclaimed their land, their wealth, and their dignity. And as for Kazi, he returned to Amangwe, where he was welcomed as a hero. But Kazi did not seek glory or fame. He knew that his work was not finished. He had stolen from the rich, but he had also given to the poor. And in doing so, he had shown the world that true righteousness lay not in the actions of a single man, but in the collective spirit of the people. And so, the story of the righteous thief was passed down through generations, a tale of courage, justice, and the power of one man's actions to change the course of history. The end. Please like and subscribe.